My name's Anna Bromley. I've been working as a project program Scrum Master. I'm doing testing at the moment. I'm doing business requirements, all sorts of things for over a decade now. Um, I've I've got accreditations in Scrum Mastering, project program management, scaled agile, and things like that. And I've got my own company where I work as a contractor in London for large enterprise sized companies, and I'm mainly delivering projects relating to CRM systems these days. And I've got my own website, and I do pre-record longer training materials that are available on my website. So this is basically just a flavor of one of those particular courses where I talk about Agile and Scrum. Um, so that's me. But this is actually what we're going to be talking about today. This is the main Scrum framework. So the and this is sort of like borrowed from, well-regarded sources like Scrum Alliance. I actually first came across it when I did my Scrum training. And what I've tried to do in my training course is distill all the very best bits of the information, and of which this is obviously a really small part of it. So I'm just going to be talking about today the different artifacts and events. So the artifacts there are in blue. The events are in yellow. So I wanted this to be like a really practical session and not like heavily theoretical. So I'm actually going to show you um, what a product backlog looks like, and what a sprint backlog looks like directly in Jira itself, because that's a tool that I use a lot as a Scrum Master, but there are so many other tools out there. I was just talking to someone the other day who said they loved using Asana and Rike for project and delivery management. So, like, a lot of these tools can do the same thing, and indeed, you don't really even need tooling. So, in my Agile and Scrum course on my website, I've just given templates that are in Excel, or even just in PowerPoint. So you don't even need to go down the tooling route. So anyway, I'm going to show you those, the product backlog and the sprint backlog. And then I'm also going to show you a Scrum cadence, if you like, in terms of meetings, or otherwise called events in the Scrum language, which includes the sprint planning meeting, the backlog refinement, the daily Scrum meeting, the sprint review, and the sprint retro meeting. So I've actually scheduled them into my diary, and I've put agendas in there as well, so you can see exactly what you would do during that meeting. So basically, there's three main components to this framework. There's the roles and responsibilities, there's the artifacts that I've just gone through, and then there's the events. Um, so we've got the product owner, so that's the person that's setting the vision or strategy of a project. So that's a really important role. They're the person that's responsible for prioritizing the work items that are on the backlog. The Scrum Master, which is typically a role that I would play on a project, is typically a team coach and someone who is there to remove impediments and increase the like throughput of delivery, and that's their main role, as well as managing like the work items on the tooling like Jira and things like that. And then you've got the developer, which is obviously the person that's building, or developing the actual solution. At the moment, on the projects that I'm working on, developers are also people that do customization or configuration, or they could be designers. Um, or testers even. So it's kind of a broad term for the doers of a project, but fundamentally there's those three roles. There's the people that set the vision and strategy and priorities, the people that do the doing, and then the Scrum Master, which is the team coach, communicator, coordinator, and sort of unblocker of impediments on the project. Um, so I'm going to go first to the product backlog and to the sprint backlog. Oh, and by the way, because we've got such a short period of time, if anyone does have any questions, pop them into the chat, and I'll break at the end, a few minutes before the end, and we can talk over your questions. That would be really good. So, products backlog, let me move on. I'm going to go into Jira in a second, but in case anyone hasn't seen it before, let me just spell it out. So, generally, there's a backlog that looks like this, and you've got different issue types here, and you kind of group them into general epics. And then you've got a status there, and some story points, and priority, and then an assignee. So that's all a product backlog is. So not too complicated. It's literally just a list of things to do that the product owner would prioritize. So that's the difference between that's what a product backlog is. So the difference between the product backlog and the sprint backlog is just those items in the product backlog that are going to be worked on in the next sprint. Um, so a sprint is typically, if I go back to my picture here, a 1 to 4 week increment, and so we have to decide in the sprint what we actually want to work on. So that's how the flow of work works in the framework. So you have a product backlog, and there can be things on there for for a long time, really, and that's why we do the backlog refinement meeting, which I will talk about in a minute. But then when we are getting close to the start date of our next sprint, then we will actually just move these items up into the sprint, and we will refine them further, and we'll break the tasks down further. So if I just come out of that and go directly into Jira here, so I'm not sure how much everyone knows about Scrum, to be honest, or has used Jira before. So I'm trying. This is sort of targeted at people who are quite beginner, if you like. So I'm trying to step people through. Um, I'll actually just show you here. This is the view that I just took a screenshot of, and I put it into the presentation. I can share the presentation with people afterwards if I have your email. If I don't have your email, then drop it in the chat and I will send it to you. But yeah, basically, this is the backlog here of items that have just been created. I've just got a example that I set up for the purpose of this training, to be honest, with lots of items about delivering a system implementation project. So we've got some developing the training resources, conducting training sessions, conducting the UAT, user acceptance testing. So all you would do is from the product backlog, if at your refinement meeting, you see that you're going to be needing to do this in the next sprint, then you can simply right click it, move it into the next sprint, and then it just becomes part of your sprint backlog rather than your product backlog. So that's the only really key difference between the two. The product backlog is just often less refined and more vague and needs additional detail. And by the time you're bringing things into your actual sprint, then we should have more details available. Like, for example, we should have subtasks or child issues, as they're called in Jira, down here on the right-hand panel. You would likely have acceptance criteria in here. So given when this happens, some other behavior will be expected. So you'll have the acceptance criteria written out like that. And then, yeah, you'd also have priorities outlined as well, and you'd do some sort of estimation. So they're the sort of main fundamentals of when a task or story is ready to bring into a sprint. So I already have a sprint ongoing here. It's sprint 4. But let me just flip back to my presentation. And the next thing I wanted to discuss was the daily Scrum board. So if I just go back to where we are here, oh, not that one. So I've spoken about the product backlog. I've shown you the difference between the sprint backlog. And now I'm going to talk about the board, which isn't actually on this framework, but it's a tool that you use for the daily Scrum meeting. So if you've ever heard of Kanban before, where you visualize the flow of work, then that's typically what people use in the daily Scrum meeting to visualize the work. So this is all it is, quite simply. Again, another screenshot. I'll go to the actual board in a minute. All that's here is the different stages of the delivery workflow. So in this workflow, I've got to do, in progress, blocked, ready for QA, quality assurance, and done. So you can move the subtasks throughout the delivery workflow to make sure that you're tracking things accordingly. And this is what you would actually present in your 15 minutes daily scrum every day. And we'll talk more about the meetings in a second, but let me head over there. So, I mean, I'm on the new version of Jira here, but there are other versions, older versions out there. I'm just on a free trial because I think the actual tool's quite expensive. I only use it at work and they pay for the license, to be honest. So, yeah, so this is the view that I just showed you the screenshot of. So, all you would do here, and there are different ways of setting up your board as well. So, I've decided to group mine by story, which is the green icon there. But if you configure your board, and I'm not going to go into loads of detail now, but you get lots of uh, settings that come up along the side that you can play around with. So, um, yeah, I'm not going to go into loads of detail there, but basically, if you don't like this view, like for example, you can group it by epic instead of story. You can group it by assignee instead of story. You can do it in many different ways, and you just do that via the configuration over there. But anyway, this isn't supposed to be a Jira training. It's supposed to be more about the actual framework underneath it. Yeah. So in the daily stand up, you would just generally move your items across the board and go around the room and get progress updates and identify any blockers. And I think it's really neat actually in Jira. I don't use this at the moment, but they even have this start stand up button where you can add a timer and you can keep people to the 15-minute timer and you can see the timer count down. So let me just back out of that. So you see, yeah, basically that's what I wanted to show you about the Scrum board. So let me just present my screen again. Yeah, so that's what you would do within your daily Scrum meeting. You don't have to have a board, obviously, but it is good practice. So now I've spoken about the backlog, both the product and the sprint backlog, and I've shown you the board, which underpins the daily Scrum meeting. Now I'm going to go into a bit more detail about the other different sort of meetings that you would typically have within Scrum. So I'm actually going to go back to my email because I wanted to show you what it looks like in like real life. But I have got them outlined on the presentation as well with the agendas. So this is just my calendar basically, and what I've done is I've just penciled them in so that you can actually see what it would look like if you were to implement this Scrum framework on your project or with whatever you're planning at the moment. So I've got Monday in week 1, and then I've got Friday to week 2 on Friday. So I'm following a 2-week sprint in this example that I'm giving you. On the first day, I'm not actually putting a daily stand up, I'm just having a sprint planning meeting. In the sprint planning meeting, which I've scheduled for an hour and a half, we are just going to introduce the meeting, get the product owner to discuss high priority items on the backlog and things that need to go into the sprint, define the sprint goal. So that's really important to get the team aligned around what it is you're actually aiming for over the next sprint specifically. And then get into more detailed discussions about the items. As I mentioned, as I was showing you the sprint backlog on Jira, discussions around the acceptance criteria, the story points or sizing, and other discrepancies with descriptions or clarifying understanding or breaking tasks down. So the sprint planning is really the more detailed planning session. The backlog refinement session is more high level and seeks to answer like more broader questions, if you like. But when we're at sprint planning, we're really getting into the nitty gritty. And I've spoken about task breakdown and estimation, and then just finalizing the backlog and then wrapping up. So It is a 90-minute session. Generally, team sizes, I always think shouldn't be able to a team should be able to share two pizzas. That's the way I've always thought about it or learnt it. You should never have like 20 people, for example, in a sprint planning meeting because it's probably going to be very ineffective. So I personally find teams that are like 4 to 7 or 8 are ideal. 8 probably getting on the higher end of things. So yeah, that's the sprint planning meeting. So once you've figured out what you're going to be doing for the next 2 weeks or whatever increment you decide your sprint is going to be, there's going to be the need for a daily stand up. So the idea of the daily stand up is just to discuss what you did yesterday, what you're going to do today to focus on the sprint goal, and whether you've got any impediments that are actually blocking you. So any issues that you want to raise or communicate with the team. Um, I also put a few little tips in here. So sometimes it's nice to start with some informal discussion, some quick check-ins. And as I already showed you, it's good to have a visual aid, so some sort of board. And there are other free tools out there as well, like Trello, for example, that you can do this in a much less expensive and simpler fashion than on Jira. And another thing too, as well, is to rotate the facilitator as and when you can. I'm terrible for this because um, I always end up facilitating really, but it is really good for ownership for the team actually to take responsibility for the board and for moving their items from one delivery state to another and keeping the team updated and communicated with. So that is the daily stand up and typically wouldn't last more than 15 minutes. Anything outside of an update or simple communication would be something reserved for outside of that. So would encourage team members to discuss outside of this forum. And that can be a big problem for teams because they often use it as a kind of like forum for discussing the issues and whatnot, but that should really be kept to elsewhere so that the meeting can stick to 15 minutes. And then we are coming to the backlog refinement meeting. So this is when I showed you on Jira all of the items that were lined up in the backlog. This is really where the product owner, who would typically run this meeting, would be going through those items and would be discussing them, answering clarifying questions, talking about priorities, trying to tease out of the team how we might split this work down, and that can be like group discussion, starting to think about estimates, but not expecting too much from the team at that point because the obviously information is limited, and addressing any open questions. So it's really good if the backlog is there that there's some sort of agenda which says, okay, today we're going to be discussing these topics. Take a look at the information already, come prepared. Like the more that you can prepare people for these meetings, the better, more productive they'll be, and the less work on you as the product owner or Scrum Master or facilitator to then kind of pull the information out of the team, basically. So the backlog refinement session is really important for looking at not just what's in the next sprint, but what's in the next horizon or increment, as they call it. So over about a 3 month period. So that's a really important meeting to stop you from finding out too late information that you need to know up front, and that the product manager, if knowing those things, can actually go away and find out before they ever come into the sprint, because what you don't want to happen is things that are very undefined coming in to the sprint. So that's the second week on a Wednesday. This is like ideal kind of timings that I've given you here, but obviously all of these can flex depending on diaries and all things like that. And finally, in the last day of the sprint, I've put this on Friday because it's 2 weeks after we started on Monday. But a lot of teams actually like to run their sprint like Tuesday to Thursday or Tuesday to Monday, or different sort of timings, because of other commitments or not wanting to release things on a Friday, and other things like that. So just bear that in mind. But I suppose the big showcase of the sprint, which is the last one of the last meetings, and we'll go back to the framework in a minute, is the sprint review. So this is where, unlike in your stand up, where you've just got kind of very key committed people like the product owner, developers, and Scrum Master, you've actually got like a much broader stakeholder set. You can get them involved, bring them in, get feedback from them, because they're obviously the people that you're delivering for. So good to recap on what the sprint goal is, present the key features, or improvements that you've made during the sprint. I am coming at this from quite a system oriented perspective, because they're the types of projects that I'm managing. But it's also worth noting that this methodology works in other business areas as well. Like, I've seen it work well in finance, where they are doing specific business projects, and in marketing as well. The language might be changed slightly, but the framework can still definitely apply and be applicable, because of the underlying values about incremental delivery, basically, and adaptability to change. So that's kind of what underpins it. And then obviously the most critical thing is getting feedback. So everyone would like an engaging conversation where you give the opportunity for the people that are defining the vision or requirements to actually feed back. Like, the product owner might want to highlight areas of misunderstanding, or praise the team, or build upon different things that have been built or delivered that are being showcased at that particular moment in time. Is also a place for transparency as well. So if there's anything that's not being demonstrated that was expected, then it's good to raise the fact that something isn't being demonstrated. Maybe it's not ready, maybe it's just don't have time to demonstrate it, whatever. But that's the whole point as well. It's all about transparency. And so mentioning things that were planned for that aren't being demonstrated is also an important step of a sprint review. And then just outlining what the next steps are. So all in all, that could be about an hour of time. It could be more, it could be less. It depends how much you've got to showcase. But then the final meeting of the sprint of the Scrum framework, sorry, is the sprint retro. And we'll go back to the framework in a minute, but it's often good to have a bit of a break between the two, because if you can imagine, that's like 2 hours back to back. So I've just placed them back to back there, but it is good to have a break in between. And sometimes the retro doesn't need quite as long anyway. But basically, the idea behind a sprint retro is about this inspection and adaptation, and this reflection that allows the team to improve as things go on, and actually making them responsible for improving things, and not thinking that someone else is going to come in and save the day. So generally how this would work is, and this is my favorite way of doing it, is just having 3 simple columns. Again, there's loads of tools out there that you can pay for and whatnot, but honestly, you can just use a Word document, a PowerPoint, or an Excel, whatever you've got access to just put 3 columns: start, stop, continue, and get the team just to jot down their ideas for things that they want to start doing because they haven't been doing it and they want to do it, things that are hindering them so they stop doing, and things that they want to continue doing because they're helpful practices, or they identified that they're useful for the delivery or for the teamwork, whatever, in some way. So then you would get the team to spend 5 minutes or so of, doesn't have to be silent, some people put music on, make it relaxing and a fun event. And then once their all ideas are all down, then there's an opportunity to discuss them. You can go around the room one by one and call out key things, or you can go down the list of items. But just getting feedback, really. And then the most important thing really of the retro is to get the actions down and get them assigned, so that when you come back around the loop in the next sprint, you would go back through the items from the previous sprint, and then you could reserve a few minutes to talk about the changes that you're making. And I often think that's a really motivating thing, to see that if you raise your concerns, then they get acted upon and the team actually improves. And I always say, if people don't turn up to the retro, then that's fine, but they literally have no right to complain, because this is their opportunity to resolve things. So to finish off, I'm just going to summarize. Let me just put this back into slideshow, because we are nearly at the end, and I'll see if anyone's got any questions. But basically, that's what I've taken you through. The three different key roles, albeit these can be somewhat blended, and there can be more different flavors of them, if you like, but they're broadly the three roles that you need to make Scrum work. The two different artifacts that are essential, the everything kind of stems from the product backlog, so the list of work items that you're going to be working upon, so that's essential. And then I took you through the four, is that one, two, three, four, five? That's five. One, two, three, four, yeah, five. Five different meetings. So the sprint planning meeting, the daily Scrum meeting, backlog refinement meeting, sprint review meeting, and sprint retro meeting. So that brings me to the end.